Giving treatment the treatment. Learning from our past. While examining each of the various treatment approaches of the past 100 years, you will undoubtedly discover how the perceived reason or cause of addiction has resulted in the treatment tactics of each of the specific methods or paradigms presented. In essence, what you will see is how over the past 100 years, society has treated addiction based on what it is believed to be the cause or the reason the use started in the first place. While knowing why you started in the first place is important in regards to the aspects of drug prevention, very few addicts use for the same reason that initially compelled them to use or to continue to use. While peers may have influenced their first use, most addicts eventually care little about the concerns of others unless those views support continued use. We will discuss denial in later chapters. Our societal approach to addressing addiction seems to be a very westernized way of responding to personal struggles or difficulties. The emotional behavioral mindset most often held by the addict is usually referred to as seeking instant gratification. The following example may seem oversimplified, but nevertheless it seems to be our frequent approach to finding emotional happiness and contentment in the Western world. Consider the following. If we believe that the exposure to the color blue between the ages of 7 and 9 caused a major illness, we would take great pains as a society to protect our children from that color for those specific years. Perhaps we would even outlaw the use of those colors with the exception of the sky and the water, for which we would then develop special dyes, contact lenses, or sunglasses, which could exclude that color from the light spectrum. Why? Because no one wants his or her child to acquire an illness that could have been easily prevented. The approach is successful in trying to prevent addiction, but apparently not for treating it. Remember prohibition? A constitutional amendment to treat an emotional illness. Doesn't that seem a little bizarre now? Something else that's bizarre? Trying to transmit self-esteem and self-worth when we don't have it ourselves. Recall the hypocrite. Trying to get our children to delay gratification when all they see is gluttony and excess doesn't make sense either. Even more futile than that is trying to instill hope, positive self-concept, and positive regard for others into our children's hearts when we have little for ourselves or our partners. Don't think this is the case? Well, then consider if hope, positive self-concept, and positive regard are present in your last lover's quarrel or when your child misbehaved. The above points may not seem pleasant and may be hard to face, but remember what we established earlier. We are at war, and war is not pleasant. There are casualties at war, and our excesses, greed, and the needs to feel good or right may need to be our first sacrifices. Unfortunately, the true solution is larger than the scope of this book. During war, we lose people close to us. During war, we learn how to grieve for not only the loss of life, but for the loss of how we would like things to be. We learn acceptance and begin to treat the living, the survivors. We will now begin to examine the methods used in the past for treating the casualties of the war on drugs. Those people left behind to feel the pain of a society, not a government, that has failed to address its biggest healthcare problem. Personally, I have not heard a word about addiction uttered in the government discussions about healthcare since 1996. Do you remember hearing the term drug treatment in 2009 when people ranted and raved about the health needs of our country? Of course not. It would have broken the bank. Imagine giving $4,000 to $20,000 of treatment to each addict per attempt or episode. Multiply that by the estimated 10% of the population, 30 million plus, that struggle with addictive issues. That is not the point of this book, but leaving out one of the biggest healthcare problems we face should give you concern. We need knowledge. What good is knowledge? Abraham Maslow said that full knowledge leads to right action. Right action is impossible without full knowledge. He was suggesting that if an action is taken and it is the correct one, but it was chosen outside of the full grasp of a situation, that this was not right action, only luck. He suggested that right action was a direct application of gained awareness. Very few people in our country ever take the time to learn about this crisis. Even recovering addicts rarely take the time to enter the term addiction into a search engine to gain more understanding. Somehow, addicts believe that since they have the disease, they know all they need to know about it. I know no other disease where the victim intuits some automatic knowledge of the illness because they have it. Once again, I thank you for taking the time to read this book. By doing so, you are living in the true and possibly only solution to this problem, gaining full knowledge. It is my belief that a true knowledge of the emotional pain associated with addiction will bring you relief. An understanding of the emotional dilemma faced by the using person will aid significant others in depersonalizing the addict's behavior and thereby lessening the guilt felt by loved ones who are forced to make tough, even harsh decisions for everyone involved. You cannot control their lives and actions, but you must learn to manage your own. By examining the following paradigms of addiction treatment, we will see just how they have failed as well as where they have been successful. Treatment modalities are rarely, if ever, examined by anyone outside the paradigm or perspective. At least not until now. You will see how the held notions of past treatment providers have created the different perspectives and thereby the prescribed treatment of the addicted. As you read, I'm sure you will be able to understand each of the paradigm's possible benefits and even how they might have created unintentional harm by their ignorance and inconsistencies. At the end of this process, we'll combine the successful and appropriate methods for each era or paradigm to establish a current, more holistic approach to addressing the epidemic, both for the addicted and by extension, his or her significant others. A foundation of understanding. As all the truths about addiction are not yet known, some of the points made in this chapter will be based on what is sometimes referred to in the legal system under the constructs of evidentiary law as allowed by reason, or in layman's terms as accepted knowledge. This is information that nearly everyone agrees on, like smoking is bad for you, speeding is dangerous, addiction is painful. Simply speaking, it is information that just seems obvious to everyone. In examining the history of addiction, I would like to suggest that anyone interested in some of the observations made in this book devote some more time and attention to an in-depth study of the various points made. Since this book's goal is to increase the understanding of the emotional aspects of addiction as a means of providing emotional relief, I will not provide much specific detail, as this might distract from the book's primary purpose, which is, again, treating the wounded. Time doesn't heal all wounds. One of the things I have found most interesting while working with addicts over the past 25 plus years is their amazing ability to justify their use. One of the ways they do this is by grasping onto the ideals of ancient societies that are believed to have used what are now illicit drugs. It seems as though their goal is to use this information to argue for a validation of use, the benefits of use, or even for legalization of drugs like marijuana and other hallucinogens. On the subject of legalization, I ask you to consider a simple question. If cigarettes were illegal, do you think less people would smoke? Any honest person would admit that there would be less smoking, as some people would just not break the law. The age restrictions on cigarette purchases and restricted areas for smoking have already resulted in less use, and thereby less of a health problem. If the above premise is so, then how could the legalization of marijuana result in less of a problem? The only benefit would be to the addicts and criminals who refuse to accept their problems, and maybe the legal system, which would then be absolved of the time and expense of prosecution. Let's not let them off the hook that easy. While the legal system can be a great motivator for change and eventual abstinence, it is also partially responsible for our current failures. One could argue that a more strict legal system with greater penalties would be an even greater deterrent. Ask yourself this question. Do you know anyone who was put in jail for a first offense of possession of marijuana? I didn't say arrested. I said jailed or imprisoned, sentenced to time for their first substance offense. The held notion among users is that everybody gets a pass on the first charge. Is that a deterrent? Further, much like cigarette smoking related diseases, the legalization of marijuana would create an even greater burden on the medical and mental health systems, which are obviously already struggling with the problem. I will not address the issue of legalization any further, as it is, in my opinion, a ridiculous idea spurred on by politicians seeking attention, i.e. political favor, and supported by a diseased and vulnerable segment of our society, blinded by their ambition to use. That segment being a small number of people who have smoked their way into denial, rationalization, immaturity, self-obsession, and self-centeredness, who are most likely suffering from one of the most disastrous symptoms of marijuana dependency, referred to as amotivational syndrome. You may also find it interesting to note that those ancient societies that used drugs such as the Aztecs, Incas, Mayans, and ancient Egyptians are all just that, ancient. They failed to survive. While not yet an ancient society, the American Indian also failed to maintain power over their own destiny. And were it not for government intervention to separate them from society, their fate may have been even more catastrophic. While the connection between substance use and extinction may seem erroneous, these societies are still, for the most part, no longer with us. While many of these societies, American Indian excluded, used drugs for religious purposes, many of these practices became over-exaggerated and even perverse, leading to human sacrifice and a wasting of other resources vital to survival. The Torah and the Bible both contain the Book of Solomon, in which the effect of excessive alcohol use is clearly described. The Book of Solomon may be one of the first credible written accounts of the negative effects of substance use on a society, and maybe even on addiction itself.